You're hearing an awful lot of statistics about disease recently. You just did, and a lot are interesting and some are revealing. But maybe the most consistent headline in our news media recently has been this one. America has more infections and more deaths than China has. The U.S. now leads the world in confirmed coronavirus cases, the New York Times proclaimed. Following a series of missteps, the nation is now the epicenter of the pandemic, end quote. The paper went on to contrast the inept leadership of American officials in the face of crisis, namely Donald Trump, with the swift and effective action of the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, the virus may have come from China, but they got it under control quickly, and we haven't. That was the message. And it wasn't simply the message in the New York Times. You saw pretty much the same story everywhere last week, and always with the same theme. China's got this under control, we don't. So as a public relations matter, this was a major win for the Chinese government. And that's not a small thing right now. When this pandemic finally recedes, the global order likely will be reset. Up for grabs will be control of the world. International financial systems, trade agreements, military alliances, shipping lanes. China would like to run all of it. But at this point, it's not a prize the Chinese can take by force. They've got to make the case to the rest of the world. And that's exactly what they're doing now. We are competent, they're saying. They are buffoons. The numbers prove it. Time to knock America from its perch. That's the message from the Chinese government. That's what they're saying. What's striking is how many in the West are helping them say it. At 10 a.m. on January 23rd, Chinese authorities locked down the city of Wuhan, site, of course, of the first coronavirus outbreak. But by then, it was too late. An estimated 5 million residents of Wuhan had already fled the city and dispersed around the world. In many cases, they brought the disease with them. Within days, it was clear to anyone who was paying attention that the duplicity and the criminal incompetence of the Chinese government was likely going to kill a lot of people. Yet the World Health Organization took the opposite view. On February 3rd, the Director General of WHO announced that China was doing the best imaginable job fighting coronavirus. Watch this.
During my visit to Beijing last week, I was so impressed in my meeting with President Xi at his detailed knowledge of the outbreak and for his personal leadership. And if it weren't for China's efforts, the number of cases outside China would have been very much higher. There is no reason for measures that unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade.
China's doing a great job. The messaging continued like that for weeks. As the pandemic was building and spreading across the World Health Organization busied itself casting China as the hero of the story. If it weren't for the efforts of the Chinese government, many more would die. Just 6 weeks later, as if by magic, China declared victory over the epidemic. And not surprisingly, the director of the World Health Organization was there to celebrate and to amplify the message.
Of course, we have good news today. Yesterday, Wuhan reported no new cases for the first time since the outbreak started. Wuhan provides hope for the rest of the world that even the most severe situation can be turned around.
Wuhan is the hope of the world, he said. The American media seemed highly impressed by this. They repeated China's message without skepticism and without independent verification. On March 18th, Bloomberg News announced that China's virus cases reached zero. The Global Times, the Chinese government's approved mouthpiece, contrasted the Chinese miracle with the American disaster. Quote, U.S. cities such as New York are now the most risky places in the world, the paper tweeted on March 24th. For mindless partisans in the American media, this was an irresistible story, especially 7 months before a presidential election, so they gleefully climbed aboard.
As the coronavirus pandemic continues to wreak havoc around the world, the U.S. has now overtaken every other country to become the first country to report more than 100,000 confirmed cases, surpassing China and Italy in the most perverse possible version of Trump's signature slogan, America First.
Got that? Trump is bad. Trump runs America. America's humiliation must be good. That's their view. Has there ever been a media establishment easier to control than ours? They lost their ability to think clearly years ago. It's all reflex now. Whatever Donald Trump is for, they're against. They're like dogs. Cook a cheeseburger and they drool. They can't help themselves. Lost in this very familiar cycle was any discussion of whether or not China's much-touted health numbers are real. And the short answer is no, they are not real. Like so much that comes out of China, from vinyl handbags to official human rights reports, they are fake. The question is, how fake are they? And that's not clear. Since January, Chinese media have been under tighter than usual government controls, and that's saying something. Journalists have been arrested, social media platforms have been scrubbed. We don't have a lot of reliable information about what is happening there. We do know that totalitarian governments are far more efficient at controlling populations than unruly democracies like ours. Once quarantine began in Wuhan, for example, there were reports of police locking entire families in their apartments from the outside, only to be discovered dead, all of them, weeks later. Tactics like that will definitely slow the spread of an epidemic. But by how much? That's the question. So use common sense for a moment. Roughly 5 million people fled the city of Wuhan in January. China allowed them, all of them, to travel all over the world, where they turned an outbreak into a global pandemic. That happened. And yet somehow, China claims, almost none of these people traveled to the biggest cities in their country and spread the disease there. That's their position. A story in Chinese state media last Thursday, for example, claimed there was only one new case of coronavirus in the capital city, Beijing. The infected patient, the press release said, came from the United States, not from China. Overall, the report claimed only 416 people in Beijing had been infected domestically. Of those, 394 had already been released from medical care. In other words, in a city of 22 million people, there are only 22 hospital patients in Beijing who contracted the coronavirus in China, the country where it started. So literally 1 out of every million people. Is that believable? Western media outlets believed it. They repeated that claim as fact. The Chinese government clearly knew better than that. The very next day, China closed every movie theater in the country. This Monday, 2 days ago, authorities in Shanghai shut down the city's two most popular tourist attractions, the Shanghai Tower and the Oriental Pearl Tower, for an indefinite period. That is not the behavior of a government that believes it has tamed the outbreak. No, it's an expression of fear. The rest of us should be afraid, too. China is the largest country in the world. When the Chinese distort critical data sets, like how many people are infected or how many are dying, that directly affects how every other country in the world responds to the disease. We may have wasted months assuming things about the coronavirus that were not true. There's a big cost to that. But more broadly, we should be worried about what comes after this. The Chinese government sees this moment as a battle in the struggle for control of the world. They're not distracted by impeachment or debates over pronouns. They think in sweeping terms. That's their advantage. It could be our undoing. This is a propaganda war with historic long-term consequences, and so far, we are losing badly. Senator Josh Hawley represents Missouri. He joins us tonight. Senator, thanks so much for coming on. Why do you think that health authorities in the West, and of course our mindless media, uncritically accept Chinese health statistics and use them as a basis for decision-making here?
Well, you know, Tucker, these same people, I mean, the Washington elites, the Wall Street types, and the media establishment have all pushed closer ties with China for decades. They're the same people who've been telling us that this will be great for America and the world if we integrate our economy with China's. It'll be great if we have a global economy where we send jobs overseas. It won't really matter. As it turns out, they were wrong about all of that. They've been wrong about this whole bargain. It's been terrible for America, and now we're living with the results. So I think we're finally waking up to, or at least the D.C. elite are finally waking up to, the wages of the bargain that they've struck. And it's time that we fundamentally rethink our relationship with China and the world. It's time to start putting American workers at the front and not kowtowing any longer to the Chinese government.
We see this epidemic primarily in epidemiological terms. Our screens are crowded with people in lab coats reading stats and giving, in some cases, good advice. I'm not attacking them. I'm not sure China sees it that way. How do you think China sees this moment? What are the stakes in their view?
Well, they clearly see it as a geostrategic opportunity, the same way they see everything. I mean, listen, they have a plan. They want to be the central power. They want to be the dominant world power. They have a saying that there can only be one sun in the sky. That's the saying of Chinese government officials. And they intend that sun to be China, to be Beijing. And they see this as an opportunity along the way. But here's the thing, Tucker. This is also an opportunity for us. It is an opportunity for us to open our eyes. The American people have known this for decades. They've known that partnering with China is dangerous. They've known that sending our supply chains overseas was wrong. Now we have the opportunity to correct those mistakes. It's time that we go all in on America rather than all in on China, and we're going to have the chance to do that now.
I hope so. I mean, we can start by ceasing the subsidizing of the education for the children of Chinese elites. I know this is off topic, but I can't resist. Our colleges and universities, almost every one of which is supported by taxpayers in the end, educate at a net loss the children of the people who are trying to displace us. Why are we doing that?
Yeah, and we also allow those educational institutions to take money directly almost from the Chinese government, these Confucius Institutes, as they're sometimes called, Tucker, that are on campuses all across the country, directly subsidized by Beijing. You might ask, why do American campuses allow these Chinese government outposts on their own campuses? And the reason is they get paid to. I mean, it's actually lucrative. So yes, we have got to stop this cozy dealing with Beijing on our campuses, with our international trade from our financial institutions and our multinational corporations. It's time to actually put the American worker and American families and American interests first. It's time to put them at the front. And that's why I say we're going to have an opportunity now, and we need to not miss it, to invest in this country, to go all in on this country, and I hope that that will be our focus. This pandemic should make clear to us that it is an urgent need that we do this going forward.
I think you're exactly right. Thank you for your clarity, and I marvel that there are people working against those goals, which are so clearly positive and overdue. Senator, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.